What is going on, my beautiful beings? I want to welcome you to another episode of Paranormal and Proud. I'm your host, Serena, and I want to thank you for being patient with me while I was on a little bit of a hiatus. I went on vacation, which was amazing, and I had knee surgery, which I am healing great from, and just some overall family things going on. And I really appreciate your patience, and I am so glad to be back. You know, you can find me on pretty much every podcast platform. The only one I am having issues figuring out is iTunes for Apple, but that's okay. I'm on pretty much everything else, including the KUAP, Troubled Minds Radio Network. And that is an excellent network, and it is owned by Mr. Michael Strange. He runs the Troubled Minds podcast and radio show, which you can see and listen to 5 days a week. It is Sunday through Thursday, and you can find everything Troubled Minds at troubledminds.org. You can even listen live to the station. And I am on that station along with some other amazing, brilliant minds that have amazing podcasts and radio shows. Thank you so much. Today, my friends, I am going to be bringing you something that's intrigued me for quite a while. We're going to be talking about the Lake Michigan Triangle. And Lake Michigan is something that I have grown up very close to. Basically, the Great Lakes are each an inland sea, and they're all connected by channels and rivers. And they have a lot to do with the shipping throughout the country, actually. You can usually stand on one end of one of the Great Lakes and not be able to see the other end. It's almost like being on the ocean, but it is fresh water. Lake Michigan even affects the weather where I grew up because growing up not too far from the lake, we have what's called lake effect snow, which most of the Great Lakes produce, and it's this really heavy, wet, good packing snow, but it could be a blizzard on one block and the other block be completely dry because of this lake effect. And it even affects the temperature during the summer. When it's really hot inland, you go towards Lake Michigan. If the wind is blowing the right way, it's like 20 degrees cooler. It's pretty amazing, and it's beautiful. I even have a personal connection to Lake Michigan. Back in the 1800s, on the shores of Milwaukee, there was a fishing village made up of immigrants called the Kashubs. They settled on a peninsula called Jones Island. They came from the border of Poland and Germany way up by the Baltic Sea. They were fishermen and they settled on the peninsula, which is now an island. They even had their own language. They called it Kashubish. It was basically a dialect mixed of German and Polish because lots of Polish and Germans were marrying. Basically, in my family, for example, all the men were German and all the women were Polish. It's kind of how it went, at least for me. And my great grandpa was born on the island in 1895. They have a reunion every year. At least they used to. I don't know what happened with COVID, but they were having a reunion with all of the descendants were welcome to come and celebrate the heritage of the Kashub people. So this colony, this fishing village, went from the 1870s to roughly the 1920s. The population grew to nearly 1,800 people. Sadly, the city of Milwaukee took advantage of the fact that very few of them actually owned the land, and they were technically squatters. So they kicked them all out. But the Kashubs didn't leave without a fight. The women would even chase those trying to kick them out away with their brooms, and I'm pretty sure that's where I get my fighting spirit from, at least part of it. The last resident even held out until the 1940s, and it ended up turning into an industrial area where our Milwaukee's wastewater treatment plant is. And which is kind of cool because my great grandpa, who was born and grew up on the island for part of his life, ended up working there as an electrical engineer. Another fun fact, well, it's a legend, but I'm pretty sure it's fact. The Kashub people, since they were fishermen, decided that they were going to find a way to eat fish and make it fast and cheap, and that was via fish frying. And If anybody knows the Midwest, especially Wisconsin, we are known for our fish fries. It's a Friday tradition. Lots of people around the country might eat fish on Fridays for Lent or give up meat for Lent, but in Wisconsin especially, and I think like the UP of Michigan and other parts, it's a every Friday tradition, and it is amazing. So if you ever come up here and visit, one of the first things you need to check out is a Friday fish fry. Anyway, that is enough of a walk down family history lane for me. Why don't we start discussing the Lake Michigan Triangle? There's a more sinister side to Lake Michigan. You've probably heard of the Bermuda Triangle and perhaps even the Alaskan Triangle. What about the Lake Michigan Triangle? The triangle points consist of Manitowoc, Wisconsin, Ludington, Michigan, and Benton Harbor, Michigan. And from the research I've done, there's been some interesting things. A lot of the activity is associated through and near Benton Harbor. There's always some kind of interesting connection through Benton Harbor. And this area of Lake Michigan has been known to be the site of countless shipwrecks and plane crashes. There are even rumors about a magnetic vortex or a supernatural portal that affects the Lake Michigan Triangle. The first incident we are going to discuss is considered the first quote-unquote modern-day shipwreck attributed to the Lake Michigan Triangle. Of course, there were probably many before that, but this is a more modern-day kind of shipwreck. And it was the Thomas Hume, and it was built in 1870 in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. The Thomas Hume was a schooner, and it hauled lumber from Muskegon to Chicago, Illinois. So Muskegon is in Michigan, and Chicago, of course, Illinois. And went missing as they encountered a storm squall during a voyage it took along with another schooner named the Rue Simmons. The ship had been emptied in Chicago, and they were on their way to reload in Muskegon. The weather was getting ominous, and the waves were getting treacherous. The Rue Simmons captain decided to turn back to Chicago to avoid the storm. But the Thomas Hume kept along the route, thought they could handle the giant waves. The Great Lakes have crazy waves. I mean, they could sink ships very easily, even in current days. A couple of days later, once the weather was fair and more favorable, the Rue Simmons sailed back to Muskegon. They expected to see the Thomas Hume at the docks, and there was no sign of its ship or its crew. The crew consisted of 6 men. It was determined that the schooner had gone missing as a result of the storm squall on May 21st, 1891. The ship was searched for on various ports along the coast of Michigan, but was never found. Nobody even found debris. Some of the theories were that the crew had docked, repainted the ship, and sailed off under a new name, which seems a little crazy because it takes a long time to repaint a ship, and it's just a little bit too much effort to do as quickly as they would have had to do it, including allowing it to dry. It was also theorized that it was run down by a larger steamer, and the captain of the steamer ordered his crew to stay silent about the incident and never speak of it again. Of course, since it's dubbed the Lake Michigan Triangle, there are plenty of rumors of paranormal and extraterrestrial activity, like it ran into a portal and just disappeared, or aliens abducted everybody and the ship just sailed off into nothingness. In 2006, the wreck was finally discovered by the AT&T recovery team. It was found in the southern part of Lake Michigan, and it was well preserved and intact due to sinking at the great depth. If a ship sinks in the Great Lakes, the water is very cold at the deeper depth. So when it sinks to a deep depth, even the more shallows, the water is usually pretty cool. It's usually in the 60s, 50s, even during the summer, and it is well preserved. Unlike the oceans, where the salt water a lot of times will deteriorate the ships quite fast. Of course, over the years, there was no way to tell if there were any bodies found because, of course, sea life and everything would have taken care of the remains in that matter. The next shipwreck we are going to discuss is the Rosabelle. She was built in 1863, and in 1921 she was found overturned. It was a mystery because there was no recognizable cause, and the whole crew was missing of 9. There were no clear distress signals nor weather in the area that would explain the ship's overturning. Some had speculated that there was some kind of extraterrestrial intervention or something paranormal that may have happened. It was considered that a portal could have opened up and sent the people on the ship to a different dimension. Of course, minds will definitely take off with possibilities, and as I said before, the weather on the Great Lakes is very unpredictable. I mean, a big wind could come and just take it out. The only thing is the fact that the bodies never turned up anywhere. She was loaded with lumber and left High Island bound for Benton Harbor, Michigan. And when she apparently capsized, they speculated a gale on Lake Michigan took her out. And then she was found 42 miles from Milwaukee. And as I said, the crew was nowhere to be found, never washed up. I mean, if they disappeared, they just sunk straight to the bottom, or maybe they're hanging out on a spaceship somewhere. She drifted 20 miles off of the coast of Kenosha, which is in the far southeastern Wisconsin, on the border of Illinois. A ship called the Cumberland towed her into Racine Harbor, which is also southeastern Wisconsin area on the shore of Lake Michigan. They thoroughly searched the ship, and absolutely no sign of the crew, no sign of distress, just absolutely completely missing. And they definitely dragged and searched the waters with the technology they had back then, and nothing was ever found, and no resolution to the mystery was ever figured out. Next, we're going to move on to the crash of Flight 2501. And this is actually one of my favorite mysteries that I have read about and researched on the Lake Michigan Triangle. Destination Unknown, hosted by Josh Gates, actually did an incredible episode on this plane crash, and it was very intriguing, so I would suggest you check it out if you're interested. On June 23rd of 1950, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 took off from New York en route to Seattle, Washington, with a layover in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Somewhere over Lake Michigan, the plane crashed, and 58 passengers and crew perished. At the time, it was the worst aviation disaster in the history of the U.S. and the world. To this day, it remains one of the most high-profile aircraft disappearances in history, and it is the only commercial aircraft in the U.S. to remain missing to this day. Flight 2501 was the Douglas DC-4, and there's only a handful left of those aircraft to this day. Back in those days, commercial airplanes were not pressurized, and there was a storm in the area, so the pilot requested to fly lower at 4,000 feet while over Cleveland, Ohio, and that request was granted by air traffic control. About 40 minutes later, air traffic control requested that the plane descend to 3,500 feet to allow another struggling airline to navigate through the severe turbulence at 5,000 feet. The pilot descended upon request. They realized there was a storm, but didn't realize how bad it was. They requested to descend to 2,500 feet, but unfortunately they were denied. And that was the last radio call that would ever come from Flight 2501. They believed when the call came in to request the descent that they were over Benton Harbor, Michigan. Unfortunately, Benton Harbor, Michigan was off course for them. After that, no one knows exactly what happened to the flight and its passengers. It's speculated that the storm they flew into was severe enough to possibly break the plane apart, or they were hit by a downdraft that forced them into the lake. Early the next morning, air traffic control realized that the plane would have run out of fuel by then, so they were ordered to search near Milwaukee. After they didn't find anything, they were ordered to search near South Haven, Michigan. And Debris and even human remains were washing ashore. The mayor of South Haven even had to close the beach due to the macabre sight upon the shores. Sadly, none of the remains were identified, and they were buried in a nearby cemetery in a mass, unmarked grave. Thankfully, later on, there was a memorial stone made for the victims of the crash where they were buried. No one has ever found the main wreckage, though it is very well known through watching this episode of Destination or Expedition Unknown, I apologize, that there has been teams that have been looking for them for quite a long time. People have been taking countless hours out of their life to dive and search and use LiDAR and radar and all kinds of different technologies, but still haven't found it quite yet. And it remains unsolved. The next incident we're about to talk about is straight out of the Twilight Zone. This is the disappearance of Stephen Kubecki. This happened on February 20th of 1978. Stephen Kubecki was a 23-year-old college student at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. That's near the eastern shores of Lake Michigan. Stephen was on a cross-country skiing trip by himself near Stregontok, Michigan. And I apologize if the pronunciation was incorrect. The day after his trip began, some snowmobilers spotted an abandoned pair of skis and a backpack full of supplies. They contacted the authorities and identifying the owner of the skis and backpack as Stevens, so they began a rescue mission immediately. The only clues were a 200-yard trail of footprints fading into the shores of Lake Michigan. The rescue team assumed that Stephen went to the shores and fell through the ice and had died of drowning and hypothermia. Stephen was familiar with the area, so the idea of him walking out on the lake and falling through the ice was puzzling to those who knew him. Now, on May 5th of 1979, over a year after going missing, Stephen Kubecki woke up, quote-unquote, in the grass of Pittsfield, Massachusetts. He was 700 miles away from where he went missing. He told investigators that he woke up with strange clothes on. He had a backpack full of maps that indicated that he had done some extensive traveling, and he had a t-shirt on from a Wisconsin marathon, and stated to reporters that he felt as he did a lot of running. He claimed that he had no recollection of anything that happened between the time that he was in the snowy fields of Michigan to when he woke up in Pittsfield. Some people speculate that he had been abducted by aliens or entered some kind of portal, and it took him through miles of dimensions, light years away, where he just went on all kinds of adventures and they wiped his memory. Some people believe that he was just lying about the whole situation and wanted to get away and have the time of his life for a while. And maybe he hit his head and led a different life for over a year and just finally woke up and remembered who he was at that time. It's really hard to say. Based on the research that I've done, he's really not into talking about the whole incident, although other podcasters and investigators have tried to talk to him about it, and he just kind of wants the whole thing in his past and not to recollect it, which we respect, of course. Well, my friends, next we are going to be talking about a place. And did you know that Lake Michigan actually has its own version of Stone Henge? Yeah, and it's 40 feet under the water, just like England's, but submerged. Back in 2007, archaeologists diving in Lake Michigan's Grand Traverse Bay came across some interesting-looking stones placed in a circular pattern while they were searching for shipwrecks. They observed them and took pictures of them before heading back to shore. Upon developing the photos, they found petroglyphs of mastodons. They estimate the stones are somewhere around 9,000 years old. I mean, the pyramids are only about 3,000 to 5,000 years old, and Stonehenge in England is about 5,000 years old. It's pretty significant. So 9,000 years ago, Michigan's Grand Traverse Bay did not exist. The water level of Lake Michigan was around 100 feet lower than it is today, and the Stonehenge-like structure was found about 40 feet below water surface. And This was only, quote unquote, a few thousand years after the ice age that this structure was constructed. Now, they don't know a ton about these at this time, since it's said that only a few archaeologists are divers. So more research must be done to learn more about the origins of Lake Michigan's Stonehenge. It is believed that it was a structure local to native people, and they probably used it for rituals. Unlike Stonehenge out in England, it doesn't actually line up with any celestial or astrological structures. And could this simply be a Native American creation, or is this something with more of an extraterrestrial meaning? They say when the pyramids were constructed, they didn't have the technology, well, through research they may have, but they theorized that aliens actually helped them build the pyramids. And there's a lot of ancient structures around the world that they theorize that aliens help, because they use these pieces of brick and stone and heavy objects that they feel that there's no way that back in that day they could have done with just manpower and no machines. Though through a lot of the shows that I watch about ancient history and ancient artifacts, that they are starting to discover ways that they may have been able to move these giant bricks and structures without actual machines. I honestly hope that more research is put into the Stonehenge-like structure so they can learn more about the indigenous life of the area, because Native American history goes back thousands of years. And by learning about them and how they lived and what happened to them, it may be able to help us today. Now, those examples that I discussed are only a handful of examples of some of these things that happened over Lake Michigan's triangle. And some of them can probably be explained by bad weather, and others not so much. I mean, who falls asleep and wakes up in a completely different state over a year later and has no recollection of it? That's just either there's a lot of conning going on there, or something crazy really happened. Perhaps some kind of abduction or portal. We won't know. I mean, we may someday, because research is coming a long way with that kind of stuff, and I'm really excited as new innovations and new theories are being proven. It's really quite amazing. There's also the factor of whether Lake Michigan can be as treacherous as the ocean sometimes, because it's just can be unpredictable weather and downdrafts. As I mentioned in the plane wreck, downdrafts can be just as devastating, if not more so, as a tornado or a waterspout, because it just pushes you down and smashes you into the ground or the water. Well, my friends, that wraps up the Lake Michigan Triangle. I would absolutely love to know what you think, what could be happening. You can email me by clicking my link in the show notes, and also you can find my link at troubledminds.org/friends, and you'll find me along with some other creative minds that make up the KUAP Digital Broadcasting Troubled Minds Radio Network. And again, at troubledminds.org, you can find everything else Troubled Minds, including Listen Live. If you enjoy my show or happen upon the other creators on the radio network and you'd like to share us with your friends, family, on social media, we would really appreciate it. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so if you ever want to email me on Twitter or via my email address on my link tree and give me some show ideas, ask me questions, tell me what you think about the episodes and some theories you might have, can always do a follow-up if that happens. This wraps up another show of the Paranormal and Proud podcast. I'm your host, Serena, and I thank you so much for sticking with me, and I hope you take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.